They laughed when a Navy SEAL was left an abandoned place no one wanted, hidden deep in the forest. They thought it was a burden, a mistake, a quiet way to push him out of the family's story. But from the moment he stepped onto that land, his dog refused to move forward, as if it already knew the truth waiting inside. What they didn't know was that this place had been used, sealed, and forgotten for a reason. And what his loyal German shepherd sensed that night would save his life and uncover a legacy buried by silence. This is not a story about land or money or inheritance. It's a story about loyalty, destiny, and why some truths are only revealed to those strong enough to protect them. So, if this story speaks to you, please like the video, subscribe to the channel, and help us reach our first 1,000 subscribers. Nathan Crow returned to the edge of the forest town on a gray afternoon that felt reluctant to arrive. The sky hung low and unmoving, a flat sheet of cloud that pressed down on the roofs and the narrow streets as if the place itself were trying to stay unnoticed. He had not been back in more than a decade. The town had not changed much, but he had, and the difference made everything feel slightly misaligned, like stepping into a room where the furniture had been rearranged while he was gone. He parked near the old municipal building and sat in the driver's seat longer than necessary, one hand resting on the steering wheel, the other absent-mindedly rubbing a faint scar along his knuckles. Nathan was 40 now. His build was still solid, functional rather than imposing, shaped by years of military discipline that had never fully loosened its grip. His hair, once dark brown, was cut short and flecked with early gray at the temples. A trimmed stubble framed a face marked by sharp lines and a permanent reserve, the kind of expression that discouraged small talk and invited assumptions of distance. People often mistook his quiet for coldness. He rarely corrected them. In the back seat, Atlas shifted his weight and let out a dashed breath. The German shepherd was 7 years old, large but lean, with the controlled posture of a dog that had spent most of his life working rather than playing. His coat was a deep mix of black and tan, dulled slightly with age, and his amber-brown eyes followed Nathan with steady attentiveness. Atlas had been a canine unit dog, trained for detection and patrol, before an injury and time had ended his service. Since then, he had been Nathan's shadow, moving with him from place to place, sleeping lightly, always alert, always listening. If Nathan noticed the silence pressing in on him now, Atlas noticed it too. The reading of the will took place in a small office that smelled faintly of old paper and furniture polish. The lawyer, a thin man with silver hair, combed carefully to one side, spoke in a practiced, neutral tone. Nathan's siblings sat together on the opposite side of the table, close enough that their shoulders nearly touched. They looked like a unit, a quiet alignment of shared history and unspoken agreements. Nathan sat slightly apart, not by design, but by habit. His brother Mark was the firstborn, tall and broad-shouldered, his posture confident in a way that suggested the world had mostly rewarded him for speaking first. His suit was expensive but worn casually, as if he did not need to prove anything by wearing it. Beside him sat Claire, her hair pulled into a neat auburn knot, her expression composed, eyes sharp with calculation. She had always been observant, quick to read a room, quicker still to decide where she stood in it. The youngest, Daniel Crow, leaned back in his chair with crossed arms, his jaw tight, impatience flickering across his face in brief, unguarded moments. Nathan listened as assets were listed and divided. Accounts, investments, the family house in town, with its freshly painted siding and carefully trimmed hedges. There were nods, murmurs of acknowledgement, the quiet satisfaction of expectations being met. No one looked at Nathan during this part. They did not need to. Then the lawyer cleared his throat. "There is one remaining property," he said, glancing briefly at the document before him. "Located north of town, parcel 47B. The deed includes the land and the existing structure." He paused, as if waiting for recognition. None came. "This property," he continued, "is bequeathed in full to Nathan Crow." The words landed with surprising weight, not because of their importance, but because of the silence that followed. Mark's mouth twitched, the hint of a smile forming before he masked it. Claire's eyebrows lifted slightly, her gaze flicking toward Nathan and then away again, as if the matter had already resolved itself in her mind. Daniel let out a short breath, something between a laugh and a scoff. "The old forest plot?" he said. "That makes sense." Nathan said nothing. He had not expected anything else. His father had been a difficult man to read, emotionally distant, precise in his routines, careful with words to the point of absence. They had shared little beyond a name and a long silence that neither had known how to break. Whatever meaning lay behind this decision, Nathan knew better than to look for explanations among his siblings. "Good fit," Mark added lightly. "You always did prefer disappearing." The lawyer moved on. The meeting ended. Chairs scraped softly against the floor as people stood. Hands were shaken. Polite expressions settled into place. Atlas, who had remained lying quietly at Nathan's feet, lifted his head and let out a low, restrained growl. It was barely audible, more vibration than sound, but it cut through Nathan's thoughts with precision. He placed a hand on the dog's collar, steadying him. Atlas fell silent, though his gaze remained fixed on Mark, unblinking. They left without further conversation. Outside, the air felt heavier than it should have. Nathan loaded his single-worn suitcase into the back of the truck and closed the tailgate with more force than necessary. Atlas jumped up into the cab without hesitation, settling into the passenger's seat with the practiced ease of routine. The drive north took them along a narrowing road that gradually shed the markings of regular use. Pavement gave way to cracked asphalt, then to gravel. The trees thickened, their branches reaching toward the road like slow-moving sentinels. Nathan drove in silence, his mind turning over the phrase, "Parcel 47B," testing it for meaning, finding none. About halfway along the route, Atlas sat up abruptly. His ears snapped forward, his body tensing, attention locked on something beyond the windshield. "What is it?" Nathan murmured, more to himself than to the dog. Atlas did not respond. He leaned forward slightly, nose lifting as if catching a scent carried on memory rather than air. His tail was still, rigid. Nathan felt a flicker of unease, sharp and unwelcome. Atlas had reacted to explosives, to strangers, to hidden threats. He had never reacted like this to a place. The sensation passed as quickly as it came. Atlas relaxed, though he did not lie back down. Nathan dismissed it, blaming fatigue, the long day, the emotional residue of returning to a life he had left behind. The forest road ended at a rusted gate, hanging open on one hinge. Beyond it, barely visible through the trees, stood the old structure. The former ranger station crouched low against the land, its concrete walls stained with age, its windows dark and uninviting. A collapsed observation tower leaned at an angle nearby, its metal supports twisted and half swallowed by vines. Nathan cut the engine. The silence rushed in. He stepped out, boots crunching softly on damp gravel. The air smelled of earth and iron, and something faintly chemical. A trace so old it felt embedded rather than present. Atlas jumped down beside him and immediately slowed, his posture shifting from companionable to professional. His head lowered slightly, his steps measured. "This is it," Nathan said quietly. He did not know why his father had kept this place. He did not know why it had been left to him. What he did know, standing there at the edge of the clearing with the forest closing in on all sides, was that this inheritance had never been meant to be shared. Atlas stopped at the threshold of the station entrance and refused to go farther. Nathan looked down at him, a question forming that had no words yet. Atlas met his gaze, eyes steady, unflinching. Whatever waited inside, the dog had already sensed it, And for the first time since the phone call that had summoned him back, Nathan felt something stir beneath the weight of grief and distance. Not comfort, but warning. By the time dusk settled over the forest, Nathan understood that the land itself had a way of swallowing sound. The wind moved through the pines without urgency, bending their tall, straight bodies just enough to make them whisper, not to one another, but to the ground beneath them. The ranger station stood at the center of a small clearing, its concrete shell darkening as daylight drained away, edges softening into shadow. It did not loom. It endured. That difference unsettled him more than grandeur ever could. Nathan unloaded the bare minimum from the truck: a lantern, a bedroll, a canvas bag with food and tools. He moved with the economy of habit, each action deliberate, each pause purposeful. Atlas stayed close, his large frame brushing against Nathan's leg from time to time, as if confirming position. Up close, the dog's age was visible in the faint graying around his muzzle and the stiffness that lingered in his left hind leg, an old service injury that flared in cold weather. Still, his presence radiated control rather than weakness. Atlas was not restless. He was working. The ranger station bore the marks of multiple lives layered over one another. The concrete walls were cracked but intact, reinforced at the corners in a way that suggested military engineers rather than civilian builders. Rust streaked down from old fixtures, and moss clung stubbornly to the shaded side of the structure, softening what time had failed to break. The observation tower nearby leaned at an angle that made Nathan instinctively measure its fall radius, calculating danger without conscious thought. The place invited assessment. It demanded it. Atlas stopped again as they crossed the invisible boundary where gravel gave way to packed earth. His ears lifted sharply, rotating to track sounds Nathan could not hear. The fur along his spine rose, not dramatically, but with controlled tension. This was not fear. This was recognition. Nathan slowed, resting his hand lightly against Atlas's shoulder. The muscle beneath his palm was taut, coiled. "Easy," he murmured. The word came out low, instinctive, the same tone he had used in places far louder and far more lethal than this. Atlas did not relax, but he accepted the contact, holding his position. Nathan felt it then, a subtle shift in the air, not movement, a tension. The sensation that something old had been disturbed by their arrival, not in anger, but in awareness. He dismissed the thought immediately. He had spent too long around men who romanticized silence into omens. Still, the feeling lingered, light but persistent, like pressure behind the eyes. They chose the main room to set up for the night. It had once been an office or shared space, judging by the remains of bolted-down furniture and the ghost outlines of maps that had long since been removed from the walls. Nathan swept debris aside, his movements methodical. The floor creaked under his weight in places, the sound sharp and protesting, as if unused to being trusted again. Dust rose and settled, catching briefly in the lantern light before sinking back into invisibility. Atlas paced the perimeter, nose low, tail still. He paused at the rear of the station, near a heavy steel door welded shut. The metal was scarred, darkened around the edges as though exposed to heat long ago. Atlas sniffed, then sat directly in front of it, his body aligned squarely with the entrance. He did not look back. Nathan watched him for a long moment. "You don't like that door," he said quietly. Atlas responded with a soft huff through his nose, eyes fixed forward. Night came fully. The forest closed in, branches knitting darkness together until the clearing felt smaller, more intimate. Nathan lay back on his bedroll, boots still on, one arm bent beneath his head. He stared up at the cracked ceiling, tracking the shadows that shifted as the lantern flickered. He had slept in worse conditions, on harder ground, under heavier threat. And yet, sleep refused him now. It was not sound that kept him awake. It was the absence of it. The forest had gone unnaturally still, as if holding its breath. Even Atlas did not settle. The dog remained seated by the steel door, posture unwavering, eyes open, ears forward. Hours passed. Nathan checked his watch twice. Each time, Atlas had not moved an inch. That was when the thought surfaced. Uninvited and unwelcome, this place had not been abandoned. It had been sealed. Nathan sat up slowly, careful not to startle the dog. He scanned the room again, letting his gaze linger on details he had dismissed earlier. The placement of vents high along the walls, the thickness of the concrete, the way the windows were narrow, angled inward rather than out. This had never been a simple ranger station. It had been designed to contain as much as it was to observe. A memory stirred at the edge of his mind. His father at the kitchen table years ago, hands wrapped around a mug gone cold, eyes distant. A man who never spoke of work, who deflected questions with silence instead of lies. Nathan had always assumed that distance was disinterest. Now, standing inside this place, he wondered if it had been restraint. Near midnight, Atlas finally moved, not away from the door but closer. He rose, placed one paw against the metal, and pressed his nose to the seam where weld met frame. Then he did something Nathan had never seen him do before. He whined. Just once. Low. Controlled. A sound of warning rather than distress. Nathan's chest tightened. The night passed in fragments. Nathan drifted into shallow sleep and surfaced again, repeatedly, each time with the same sense of being measured. When dawn finally came, it did so reluctantly, light seeping through the trees in thin, pale strands. The ranger station looked worse in daylight. Cracks widened. Stains darkened. The structure no longer hid behind shadow. Atlas finally lay down, though he did not sleep. His body remained angled toward the steel door, as if standing watch. Nathan stepped outside, breathing deeply. The cold air bit at his lungs, sharp and clean. From this angle, he could see more of the land. The forest extended farther than he had realized, rolling gently northward, dense and unbroken. This was not just a plot, it was territory. As he circled the clearing, he noticed something new. Tracks. Faint, half erased by time and weather, but unmistakable to someone trained to look for them. Old boot impressions. Vehicle ruts that did not match civilian tires. This place had seen use long after it was supposed to have been forgotten. A voice startled him from behind. "You don't see many people come up here anymore." Nathan turned, his body responding before his mind had fully caught up. The man standing at the edge of the clearing was in his late 60s, tall but slightly stooped, with a narrow frame and weathered skin that spoke of years spent outdoors. His hair was white and thin, tucked beneath a faded Forest Service cap. His eyes were pale blue, sharp despite his age. "My name's Eli Mercer," the man said, raising one hand in a non-threatening gesture. "Used to work these woods, back when this place still had a name." Eli's voice was calm, unhurried, but there was caution in his stance, the kind that came from learning when to keep distance. His clothes were practical, worn clean, and his boots bore the scuffs of habit rather than neglect. Atlas moved to Nathan's side, positioning himself between the two men without aggression. Eli noticed and nodded slightly. "Good dog," he said. "Smart one." "He's retired," Nathan replied. "Doesn't mean he stopped working." Eli's mouth twitched, not quite a smile. "No, it usually doesn't." They stood there, the ranger station looming quietly behind them. Nathan felt the weight of the land settle more firmly onto his shoulders. The gray area his father had left him was no longer abstract. It was tangible. It breathed. He had come expecting an unwanted inheritance. What he had found instead was a place that refused to stay silent. And Atlas, steady at his side, had known it from the moment they arrived. Morning entered the ranger station without ceremony. It slid in through narrow windows, pale and thin, settling across the cracked concrete floor as if testing whether the space would accept it. Nathan woke before the light fully took hold, his body responding to habit rather than rest. The stiffness in his shoulders reminded him how little sleep he had actually managed. But there was a clarity in his mind that had not been there the night before. This place demanded attention, and he had learned long ago that ignoring such demands came at a cost. Atlas rose the moment Nathan sat up. The German Shepherd stretched carefully, favoring his injured hind leg for a brief second before putting weight on it again. His coat caught the early light, revealing the subtle graying along his muzzle and the faint scars hidden beneath thick fur. Marks of training exercises, controlled detonations, and environments where hesitation had once meant failure. Atlas shook himself once, then stood waiting, ears already tuned to the forest beyond the walls. Nathan began with the practical work. He cleared debris, stacked fallen boards, and swept away years of accumulated dust. As he worked, patterns emerged. The walls were thicker than necessary for a civilian structure. The corners reinforced with steel rods embedded deep into concrete, concealed but unmistakable to someone trained to look. Even the drainage channels cut into the foundation were precise, angled to divert water away quickly and silently. This building had been meant to endure stress, weather, weight, impact. Atlas moved constantly, circling the interior with measured steps. He paused beneath the ceiling, head tilted, nostrils flaring. Nathan followed his gaze upward and noticed something he had missed the day before. A narrow access panel, nearly invisible beneath layers of paint and grime. He fetched a stool, climbed carefully, and pried it open. Inside lay a folded map, brittle with age, edges yellowed and curled. Symbols marked locations across the surrounding forest, clearings, elevation points, routes that avoided main roads. The markings were clean, deliberate, drawn by someone who understood movement and concealment. Nathan's breath slowed as recognition settled in. This was not ranger work. This was training. More discoveries followed. Beneath loose ceiling tiles, he found laminated sheets listing drills and schedules. The text faded but legible. Unit identifiers appeared in the margins, combinations of letters and numbers that tugged at his memory but refused to align with any official designation he knew. He had spent years memorizing such things. These did not exist. Atlas reacted strongly to certain areas, pulling Nathan toward the observation tower outside, then back again toward the sealed section of the station. Each time, the dog's body language sharpened, ears forward, tail rigid, breath controlled. He was tracking something old but persistent, layers of scent embedded in wood and metal, oil residue, oxidized steel, faint traces of explosives long since removed but never forgotten. As Nathan stood beneath the tower, running a hand along its corroded supports, a familiar sensation crept up his spine. Not fear, recognition. The structure leaned not from neglect alone, but from repeated stress, vibrations that had traveled upward through the frame over years of use. Training jumps, fast descents, controlled chaos. He closed his eyes briefly, and the forest dissolved. For a moment, he was back in another place, another time. The echo of boots on concrete, the smell of cordite and sweat. Commands delivered without inflection. He saw his own hands, younger, steadier, tightening straps, checking gear. He remembered the way instructors had spoken about off-the-books operations, places that did not exist, exercises that left no trace. Necessary shadows, they had called them. Nathan opened his eyes. His father's face surfaced in his mind, unbidden. The quiet man at the kitchen table, the one who never spoke of work, who flinched almost imperceptibly at sudden noises, who drank his coffee black and let it go cold. Nathan had always assumed his father's silence was emotional distance. Now, he wondered how much of it had been containment. Near midday, Atlas froze. He stood near the back wall, head low, body angled toward a section of concrete that looked no different from the rest. His nose hovered inches from the surface, tracing an invisible line. Then he sat abruptly, gaze fixed, waiting. Nathan felt it again, that subtle pressure, the sense of attention. He approached slowly, scanning the wall. There were no markings, no obvious seams. But when he pressed his palm against the surface, he felt a difference, a faint, hollow vibration beneath solid concrete. Nathan stepped back, heart beating harder now, not from fear, but from the weight of implication. If this place had been modified, then someone had wanted parts of it forgotten, not abandoned, hidden. He forced himself to step away. Whatever lay behind that wall was not meant to be uncovered impulsively. He needed context, history, someone who remembered. That afternoon, Nathan followed one of the routes marked on the map, leading deeper into the forest. Atlas trotted ahead, pace steady, occasionally glancing back to ensure Nathan followed. The path was faint, but intentional, worn down by years of boots rather than animals. It led to a small clearing where the ground dipped slightly, the earth darker, richer. There, partially concealed by fallen leaves and encroaching roots, stood a line of weathered wooden markers. No names, no dates, just rough-hewn planks driven into the soil, unevenly spaced. Some leaned, others had fallen, reclaimed by the forest. Atlas slowed, his movements subdued. He lowered his head, sniffed one of the markers, then lay down beside it, chest pressed to the ground. His posture was not alert now. It was reverent. Nathan's throat tightened. He knelt, brushing leaves away from the base of the nearest marker. There were no remains visible, no obvious graves, but the implication was clear enough. This ground had been used, then erased. Training accidents, perhaps. Or worse. Men who had never officially existed, whose ends were never recorded. He thought again of his father, of the way the man's hands had sometimes trembled when he thought no one was watching, of the nights he had woken to hear his father pacing the house, restless, unable to settle. Nathan sat back on his heels, the forest closing in around him. The land his father had left him was not a retreat. It was a ledger, a record written in absence and silence. Atlas rose and pressed his head briefly against Nathan's shoulder, a rare gesture of contact. Nathan rested his forehead against the dog's, eyes closed. By the time they returned to the station, the light was already shifting toward evening. Nathan did not attempt to breach the altered wall. He did not touch the sealed door again. He understood now that this place was layered, each discovery demanding patience. As he sat near the entrance, Atlas beside him, Nathan made a quiet decision. He would not run from this inheritance, and he would not treat it lightly. Whatever his father had witnessed here, whatever he had chosen to carry alone, had now been passed on. The ranger station stood silent, but no longer empty. The forest behind the ranger station sloped gently downward, the ground soft underfoot, dark with moisture and decay. Morning had warmed the air just enough to loosen the chill, but the light struggled to penetrate the density of the trees. Nathan followed Atlas without question. The dog moved with quiet certainty, his gait steady, nose low, occasionally lifting his head as if checking an internal compass only he could read. At 7 years old, Atlas no longer carried the restless energy of youth, but his purpose was undiminished. This was the posture of a working dog who had found a trail worth honoring. They reached a narrow clearing that did not announce itself. No fence marked it. No sign warned away the curious. The land simply changed texture, the undergrowth thinning, the trees standing a little farther apart. It was a place the forest seemed to tolerate rather than embrace. Atlas slowed, then stopped. The wooden markers emerged gradually as Nathan's eyes adjusted. Rough planks, hand-cut, driven into the soil at uneven intervals. Time had stripped them of color, leaving gray wood split by weather and rot. Some leaned at precarious angles. Others had collapsed entirely, swallowed halfway by roots and leaves. There were no names carved into them, no dates, no symbols, just silence arranged in lines. Nathan's chest tightened. He had seen grave markers before. Official ones, precise and uniform. These were not that. These were placeholders, or apologies. Atlas approached the nearest marker and sat. He did not sniff or paw at it. He simply lowered his head and remained still, his body aligned with the wood as if standing watch. The dog's breathing slowed, deep and even. There was no fear in him now, only presence. Nathan knelt beside him and brushed leaves away from the base of the marker. The soil beneath was dark and compacted, disturbed long ago, and then left to settle back into itself. There were no remains visible, but the implication pressed heavily against him. Training accidents, perhaps, or exercises that had gone too far. Men who had been recorded nowhere, whose absence had been explained away with paperwork and silence. He straightened slowly, scanning the clearing. There were more markers than he had first thought. Too many for coincidence, too deliberate for neglect. The sound of footsteps behind him was soft but unmistakable. "You found it," a voice said quietly. Nathan turned. Eli Mercer stood at the edge of the clearing, hands resting loosely at his sides. In daylight, the old man looked more worn than before. His back was slightly hunched, his face deeply lined, skin weathered to the color of old leather. His pale blue eyes, however, were sharp, carrying the kind of alertness that came from decades of watching for small changes in an unforgiving environment. He had been a ranger once, but age and something heavier had since stripped the uniform from him. Eli approached slowly, his gaze moving over the markers with familiarity rather than surprise. He removed his cap and held it against his chest, fingers tightening around the brim. "They never put them on paper," he said. "Didn't want to." Nathan studied him carefully. "You knew." Eli nodded once. "Not everything, but enough." He hesitated, then continued. "I worked this forest when the station was still active, or at least when we were told it was active. We weren't supposed to ask questions. We were supposed to log weather patterns, wildlife movement, access roads. And we did. But sometimes I'd see trucks come through at night. No markings, no plates I recognized." He glanced at Atlas, who remained seated, unflinching. "Your dog knows," Eli added quietly. "Some places hold on to what happened in them." They left the clearing together and returned to the ranger station. Inside, Eli moved with surprising confidence, navigating the space as if memory guided him more than sight. He stopped near the main table, resting one hand on its surface. "This wasn't just a training site," he said. "It was a testing ground. New methods, new units, things they didn't want tied back to anyone important." Nathan listened without interrupting. Years of service had taught him when to let silence do the work. "There were accidents," Eli continued. "Men hurt, men killed. Officially, they were reassigned, or discharged, or never existed. The paperwork always came through clean. Too clean." Nathan felt the familiar weight of responsibility settle over him. "My father," he said. "What was his role?" Eli's expression shifted. Not guilt, recognition. He handled supply and logistics, food, equipment, transport. He wasn't giving orders, but he knew when something didn't add up. And he stayed. Eli's jaw tightened. "That kind of knowledge doesn't let you leave easily." The words landed harder than Nathan expected. He remembered his father's routines, the precision, the restraint. A man who had learned that control was the only thing standing between him and collapse. Midway through their conversation, Atlas stood abruptly. He moved toward the back of the station, ears forward, tail still. Nathan followed, heart quickening. The dog stopped near the altered wall Nathan had noticed the day before. Atlas pressed his nose to the concrete, then turned his head slightly, looking back at Nathan. His eyes held no panic, only insistence. Nathan placed his hand against the wall again. The hollow vibration was unmistakable. Eli watched the exchange with a mixture of unease and resignation. "There were rooms back there," he said softly. "Storage, they called it. But no one I knew ever went in twice." Nathan stepped back. "Not today," he said, more to himself than to anyone else. They returned to the table. Eli reached into his jacket and pulled out a small bundle of papers, folded and worn. Old ranger logs, handwritten notes, dates that matched the markers in the forest, names partially redacted, ink scratched out so aggressively the paper had nearly torn. "These aren't official," Eli said. "They were never meant to be kept." I held on to them anyway. Nathan took the papers carefully. His hands were steady, but his chest felt tight. This was not evidence meant for courtrooms. It was testimony meant for conscience. "So why give this to me?" Nathan asked. Eli met his gaze. "Because your father carried it alone, and because you're the first one who came back instead of selling the land and walking away." The sun dipped lower outside, light slanting through the windows and settling across the floor like a quiet benediction. Atlas returned to the doorway and lay down, his body angled outward, guarding the space. Nathan understood then that this inheritance had never been about ownership. It was about witness. His father had not left him an escape. He had left him a reckoning. Atlas rested his head on his paws, eyes half-lidded but alert, as if standing watch over names that had never been spoken aloud. The change did not announce itself loudly. It arrived the way most trouble does, through small shifts that only became obvious in hindsight. A truck slowed too much near the forest road. A stranger asked questions in town that sounded casual, but lingered too long on ownership. A letter arrived at the ranger station bearing an official seal Nathan did not recognize, its language polite, careful, and unmistakably curious. Nathan noticed all of it. Years of service had trained him to read patterns rather than events, and the pattern was clear. The land was no longer invisible. Atlas noticed it sooner. On the third morning after Eli Mercer's visit, Atlas refused to leave the clearing. The German shepherd stood at the edge of the access road, body angled outward, ears rotating slowly as if mapping movement beyond sight. His posture was not aggressive, but it was firm, an unmistakable signal of assessment. At 7 years old, Atlas had lost none of the composure that had once made him reliable in unpredictable environments. His coat was dusty now, streaked with mud from the forest floor, but his eyes remained sharp, tracking details Nathan could not yet see. That afternoon, Nathan drove into town for supplies. The grocery store was small, the kind where conversations paused briefly when someone unfamiliar walked in. Near the counter stood a man Nathan had never met before. Tall and thin, with a narrow face and hair slicked back too carefully for the setting. His jacket was expensive but mismatched to the place, and his smile came easily, too easily. "You must be Crow," the man said, extending a hand without waiting for confirmation. "I'm Lucas Harding. I work with land acquisition, mostly forest properties like yours." Nathan did not shake his hand. "I'm not selling." Lucas Harding did not look offended. If anything, his smile widened slightly. No one ever is at first. Harding's eyes were pale, calculating, scanning Nathan's posture the way a gambler reads a table. He spoke smoothly, but there was impatience beneath it, the faint edge of someone accustomed to leverage. He mentioned development potential, conservation grants, partnerships that sounded benevolent, but felt hollow. Nathan listened without engagement, paid for his supplies, and left. By the time he returned to the ranger station, the call had already been made. 2 days later, the family arrived. They came in separate vehicles, a detail Nathan registered immediately. Mark drove a black SUV, polished and imposing, its presence incongruous against the dirt road. Claire followed in a smaller sedan, practical and clean, while Daniel arrived last in a truck that looked borrowed rather than owned. With them came a woman Nathan did not recognize, her posture erect, movements economical. She introduced herself as Rebecca Hale, the family's attorney. Rebecca was in her mid-40s, tall and slender, with dark hair cut into a precise bob that framed a narrow, intelligent face. Her skin was pale, unmarked, and her eyes were sharp behind thin-rimmed glasses. She spoke calmly, her tone measured, each word placed deliberately. She was not here to intimidate. She was here to normalize what followed. They gathered near the ranger station, papers laid out on the hood of Mark's SUV. Rebecca spoke of zoning classifications, historical easements, unresolved claims tied to the period of government use. She framed it as a collective concern, a matter best resolved as a family. Mark did most of the talking. He stood with his hands clasped behind his back, shoulders squared, voice even. This land has value, Nathan, more than you realize. And with everything you've discovered out here, it could become complicated. Claire added softly, "We're just trying to protect you. Protect us. This doesn't need to turn into something messy." Atlas stepped forward then. The dog placed himself squarely between Nathan and the group, his body rigid, head level, eyes fixed not on Mark, but on Rebecca. His tail was still, his breathing slow. This was not fear or confusion. It was a boundary. Rebecca paused mid-sentence. Her eyes flicked downward, taking in the size of the dog, the discipline in his stance. "Is he trained?" she asked, carefully. "He is," Nathan replied, "and he doesn't misjudge people." Daniel laughed nervously. "Jesus, Nate, call him off." Atlas did not move. "I'm not selling," Nathan said again, louder this time, his voice carrying across the clearing. "And I'm not discussing this further." Mark's expression hardened. "You don't understand what's at stake." "I understand exactly," Nathan replied. "You didn't care about this place until someone told you it was worth something." Rebecca adjusted her glasses. "Nathan, no one is questioning your rights. We're simply suggesting a solution that benefits everyone." Nathan met her gaze. "This isn't about benefit. It's about erasure, and I won't be part of it." The word landed heavily. Claire's eyes narrowed. Daniel looked away. Mark's jaw tightened, irritation flickering across his carefully maintained composure. "You're being emotional," Mark said. Dad wouldn't have wanted this kind of conflict. Nathan felt a familiar ache at the mention of his father, but it did not unbalance him. "You didn't know what he wanted," he said quietly. "None of us did, but I know why he left this to me." Silence followed. The forest pressed in, wind stirring the tops of the trees, but leaving the clearing untouched. Rebecca gathered her papers with deliberate calm. "We'll be in touch," she said. "These matters have a way of resurfacing." "I'm counting on it," Nathan replied. They left shortly after, engines starting one by one, tires kicking up dust that lingered long after the vehicles disappeared down the road. Atlas remained in place until the sound was gone completely. Only then did he relax, stepping back toward Nathan and sitting at his side. Nathan exhaled slowly, a tension he had not realized he was carrying, finally releasing its grip. He rested a hand on Atlas's head, fingers pressing lightly into the familiar fur. "They'll be back," Nathan said. Atlas huffed softly, a sound that might have been agreement. As evening settled over the ranger station, Nathan sat alone on the concrete steps, watching the light fade. He thought of the markers in the forest, of Eli's logs, Of names that had never been spoken aloud, this land did not need defending because it was valuable. It needed defending because it remembered. And this time, Nathan would not step aside. The rain began without warning, as if the forest had decided all at once to release what it had been holding back. It fell hard and fast, drumming against the ranger station's roof, with a force that made the old structure groan in protest. Water ran down the cracked concrete walls in thin, restless streams, pooling in shallow depressions before seeping into the soil. Night closed in early, the sky swallowed by thick clouds that erased even the suggestion of stars. Nathan had been inside the station, sorting through Eli Mercer's old logs by lantern light, when Atlas first reacted. The German shepherd lifted his head sharply, ears snapping forward, body stiffening in a way that sent an immediate jolt through Nathan's nerves. Atlas was 7 years old, seasoned, disciplined. He did not startle easily, especially not at weather. Thunder rolled overhead, distant but heavy. Yet the dog's attention was fixed elsewhere. "What is it?" Nathan asked quietly. Atlas did not look at him. Instead, he moved toward the back of the station, the section where the altered wall and sealed areas lay. His steps were quick but controlled, claws clicking faintly against the concrete. Nathan followed, heart already beating faster, instincts flaring awake. Years as a SEAL had trained him to trust his senses, but even more than that, he had learned to trust the dog beside him. Atlas stopped short of the wall, then turned abruptly and pressed his shoulder against Nathan's leg. Hard, insistent. Not a request, but a command. Nathan frowned. "Easy, boy." Atlas responded by gripping the hem of Nathan's jacket in his teeth and pulling. "All right," Nathan said, already moving. "All right." They had barely reached the doorway when the sound came, a deep internal crack that did not belong to thunder. It rose from beneath the station, a sharp, tearing noise followed by a shudder that rippled through the floor. Atlas lunged forward, pulling Nathan clear of the entrance just as the ground beneath the rear section gave way. The collapse was violent and sudden. Concrete fractured, metal screamed as supports twisted and snapped. A plume of dust and debris burst upward, filling the air with a choking haze. Rain poured into the newly exposed cavity, hissing as it struck broken surfaces below. Nathan hit the ground hard, the breath knocked from his lungs. Atlas landed beside him, skidding slightly in the mud before regaining his footing. For a brief, disorienting moment, the world reduced itself to sound and sensation. Rain, dust, the sharp tang of rust and earth. When Nathan pushed himself up, coughing, he saw the damage clearly. A section of the station's foundation had collapsed inward, revealing a dark, gaping hollow beneath. What had once been sealed was now violently exposed. Atlas whined, a short, sharp sound, and limped toward Nathan. His left foreleg was bleeding, a shallow gash where debris had grazed him. Despite the injury, his posture remained alert, eyes fixed on the exposed cavity. "You did good," Nathan said hoarsely, dropping to his knees beside the dog. His hands moved automatically, inspecting the wound. It was not deep, but it was painful. Atlas endured the touch without protest, breathing hard but steady. Nathan tore a strip from his shirt and wrapped the leg carefully, fingers trembling now that the danger had passed. "You saved my life," he murmured, the words heavy with realization. Inside the collapsed section, partially shielded from the rain by fallen beams, lay objects that did not belong to abandonment. Metal cases, dented but intact. Waterproof containers stamped with faded military markings. Folders sealed in plastic, their edges slick with mud. This had not been a natural collapse. As Nathan stared into the cavity, headlights cut through the rain from the edge of the clearing. A pickup truck rolled to a stop, its engine idling. A man stepped out, pulling a hood over his head as he approached. He was in his early 50s, broad-shouldered, with a compact build that spoke of retained strength rather than youth. His beard was short and gray-flecked, framing a face marked by old scars and deep lines around the eyes. He moved with the careful balance of someone used to uneven ground. His name, he said, was Thomas Avery. "I saw the lights," Thomas called over the rain, "and heard the collapse. Figured someone might be hurt." Nathan studied him, measuring. "You live nearby?" "Close enough," Thomas replied. His voice was low, steady, carrying the weight of experience. "Retired Army, logistics unit, back in the day." That explained the look in his eyes, the recognition. Men who had served in the margins learned to spot one another. Thomas's gaze shifted to the exposed cavity, then to Atlas's bandaged leg. His expression darkened. "So it finally gave," he said. "You knew this place," Nathan said. Thomas nodded once. "Not officially. I passed through here years ago, long enough to know some things were meant to stay buried." He hesitated, then added, "There are people who don't like it when that changes." He stepped closer, rain dripping from his jacket, and lowered his voice. "There are things people want buried forever," he said, "and they don't always wait for accidents." The words settled heavily between them. Nathan looked back at the collapse. The pattern of damage did not align with simple structural failure. Some supports had been weakened deliberately, cut in places where stress would accumulate. Whoever had done this had not expected anyone to be in the building. Or perhaps they had. Atlas shifted, placing his body between Nathan and the open cavity, despite his injury. His stance was protective, unmistakable. Thomas noticed and gave a small nod. "Smart dog." "He's more than that," Nathan replied. The rain eased gradually, the downpour softening into a steady drizzle. Emergency lights flickered from Thomas's truck as they worked together to cover the exposed materials as best they could. Neither spoke much. They did not need to. There was an understanding between men who had learned when silence mattered. When the worst of the rain had passed, Thomas prepared to leave. He paused, meeting Nathan's gaze. "You're stirring things up," he said. "Whether you mean to or not." "I didn't come looking for trouble," Nathan replied. Thomas's mouth twitched. "No one ever does. But once you uncover the truth, it doesn't care what you came for." He glanced once more at Atlas, then back at Nathan. "Watch yourself. And watch him. Some fates are shared." After he drove away, the forest settled into an uneasy quiet. Nathan sat beside Atlas, holding the dog close despite the mud and rain. Atlas leaned into him, breathing slowly now, eyes half-lidded but alert. Nathan rested his forehead against the dog's head. The weight of what had almost happened pressed down on him, not his fear, but his clarity. Atlas had not just accompanied him into this inheritance. He had intervened. He had chosen. And in that choice, Nathan understood something profound and unsettling. Whatever path lay ahead, he would not walk it alone. The land had been a test, the truth a burden. But Atlas was the constant, the keeper of instinct when human judgment faltered. The ranger station stood broken behind them, its secrets no longer contained. And the night Atlas saved a life marked the moment there would be no turning back. The morning Nathan decided to speak was quiet in a way that felt deliberate. Fog hung low between the trees, softening the hard edges of the ranger station's broken foundation and the exposed earth beneath it. The forest no longer felt watchful. It felt resolved, as though it had been waiting for him to reach this point before loosening its grip. Atlas lay beside the steps, his injured leg healing well enough to bear weight again, though Nathan could still see the slight stiffness in the way the dog rose. The German Shepherd was 7 years old now, his movements measured, his expressions thoughtful. His amber eyes followed Nathan closely, not with urgency this time, but with trust. Atlas had done his part. What came next belonged to the man. Nathan drove into town before noon. He had not shaved, and the stubble along his jaw made the angles of his face look sharper, more severe. He wore the same faded jacket he had worn for years, the one that smelled faintly of smoke and rain and old places. He did not dress to impress. He dressed to be recognized as himself. The meeting took place in a modest community center, the kind used for town halls and veterans' breakfasts. Folding chairs filled the room, and the hum of quiet conversation faded as Nathan stepped to the front. A few reporters sat along one wall, notebooks ready, cameras resting on their knees. Among the audience were men and women whose posture Nathan recognized immediately. Former soldiers, retired handlers, people who carried service in their bodies long after uniforms were gone. One of them stood out to him. A woman in her late 30s, tall and lean, with dark blonde hair pulled into a low braid. Her skin was weathered not by age, but by exposure, the kind that came from years spent outdoors. She wore no makeup, no jewelry beyond a simple ring. Her name, he learned later, was Sarah Whitcomb, a former military canine handler who now worked with a nonprofit supporting retired service dogs. Her gaze was steady, searching, and when it met Nathan's, she gave a small, almost imperceptible nod. Nathan spoke plainly. He did not dramatize what he had found. He presented documents, logs, photographs of the site before and after the collapse. He spoke of training programs that had never been acknowledged, of men who had disappeared into paperwork and silence. He did not accuse individuals by name. He did not speculate beyond what could be supported. The truth, he had learned, carried more weight when it stood unadorned. When questions came, they were careful at first, then sharper. Legal implications, government oversight, family objections. Nathan answered what he could and declined what he could not. He felt the familiar pressure building, the old instinct to withdraw. Then he glanced toward the back of the room, where Atlas sat calmly beside his chair, posture relaxed but attentive. By evening, the story had spread. Veteran organizations reached out. Advocacy groups requested copies of the records. The family's silence was immediate and absolute. Mark's calls went unanswered. Claire sent a single message, warning of legal consequences. Nathan did not respond. The weeks that followed were difficult, but unsurprising. Lawyers circled. Letters arrived thick with formal language and implied threats. The pressure was constant, exhausting, but it lacked the sharpness of fear. Nathan had expected resistance. What surprised him was how little it mattered now. With Sarah Whitcomb's help, and the guidance of others who had lived adjacent to similar truths, Nathan began the process of transferring stewardship of the land. Not ownership in the traditional sense, but guardianship. A trust was formed, its purpose explicit, to provide a place of recovery for veterans and retired service dogs, a space where service did not have to end in abandonment. Sarah became an anchor during this process. She was direct, practical, and unsentimental. Her compassion expressed through action rather than words. She spoke openly about the dogs she had lost, the ones she had watched struggle after retirement, confused by the sudden absence of structure. "They don't forget what they were trained to do," she told Nathan one afternoon as they walked the edge of the clearing. "They just need somewhere safe to lay it down." The ranger station changed slowly. The collapsed section was stabilized. The sealed areas were documented and then closed, no longer hidden, but no longer exploited. The observation tower was repaired, its lean corrected, its platform made safe again. It did not become something new. It became something honest. Atlas adapted to the changes with quiet acceptance. He moved more easily now, his legs strengthening, his posture loosening. Other dogs came eventually. Old patrol dogs, detection dogs, Animals whose bodies had given out before their instincts had. Atlas watched them from a distance at first, then closer, teaching by example what it meant to rest without surrender. The final decision came on a morning much like the first. Fog drifted through the trees, light filtering down in soft layers. Nathan stood at the base of the observation tower with Atlas at his side, the forest stretching out below them. He had already signed the final papers. The land was no longer his to manage day to day. His role had ended. They climbed the tower slowly. Atlas moved carefully, his paws steady on the repaired steps. At the top, they stood together, looking out over the canopy as the sun began to rise. Light broke through the mist, illuminating the trees in pale gold. There were no voices, no echoes of the past demanding attention. Nathan rested a hand on Atlas's shoulder. The dog leaned into the touch, solid and warm. "I think this is where we stop," Nathan said softly. Atlas did not respond, but his presence was answer enough. They descended and returned to the truck. There was no ceremony in their departure. No one watched them go. The ranger station stood behind them, no longer a secret, no longer a burden. It was simply a place where something had ended and something else had been allowed to begin. As they drove away, Nathan did not look back. He did not need to. The inheritance had done what it was meant to do. It had tested him. It had asked for witness rather than ownership. And in answering, he had found something quieter than victory, something more durable: peace. Sometimes the miracles we expect never arrive the way we imagine. They do not come as thunder, or sudden rescue, or a voice from the sky. More often, they arrive quietly, in the form of endurance, in a warning we almost ignore, in a companion placed beside us at the exact moment we would not survive alone. Nathan believed his inheritance was land. In truth, it was discernment. It was the chance to recognize that God does not always remove hardship. Sometimes he entrusts it to those strong enough to carry truth without bitterness. In our own lives, we are often handed things that look like burdens instead of blessings. A difficult season, a loss that feels unfair, a responsibility no one else wants. And yet, Scripture reminds us that God works not only through comfort, but through calling. What feels like exile may be preparation. What feels abandoned may be protected for a reason we cannot yet see. Even Atlas, a dog trained to listen when humans hesitate, reflects something deeply biblical, that God often sends guidance through the humble, the quiet, the overlooked. A nudge, a pause, a warning, a presence that keeps us alive long enough to choose what is right. If this story spoke to you, take a moment to reflect on what you've been carrying. Ask yourself not, "Why was this given to me?" but, "What am I meant to protect, restore, or release?" If you found meaning here, please share this story with someone who may need it today. Leave a comment below telling us where you're watching from, or what part of the story touched you most. And if you haven't yet, consider subscribing to the channel so you don't miss more stories of quiet strength, faith, and redemption. May God bless you and keep you. May He grant you wisdom when the path is unclear, courage when the burden feels heavy, and peace when the work is finally done. And may you never walk alone, even when the road leads into the forest. Thank you for being here.